naturally their own, and they say, I'm going to choose to love you. And that love is going to express itself in that I'm going to give you a place to live, I'm going to put food on the table, I'm going to devote resources, emotional energy, time to loving you. And that's what God has done with his people. You see, because of sin, because of our disobedience, we do not come into this world already as God's children. I mean, in the sense that we're created by God, we're all his progeny, or offspring, you could say. But in terms of that unique relationship, that covenant that God has, where he commits to always be working for our good, God has not said this about every nation. He says to Israel, I am your father. He never said, he doesn't say that to other nations in the Old Testament. And when you think about it, it makes sense. Throughout the Old Testament, you'll see God bringing judgment on wicked nations. I mean, these nations sacrifice their children, they mistreat their women, they're evil nations. And God, as a judge who cares about justice, brings justice on these nations. Now, if God said, I'm a father to all nations, and I'm a father to you, so be comforted. If I'm Israel, I'm thinking, well, wait, if you're a father to those nations, but they got judged, and they got wiped out, what comfort should I possibly derive from that? I mean, you think about it, we even do this in human relationships. Nobody expects a father to love everyone in the same way that a father loves his own son. I mean, if you have a father who's negligent in providing resources to his own kid, nobody looks at that guy and says, like, well, no big deal, whatever. We all expect him to do that. But nobody expects a father to do that for every person in the world. It doesn't mean that he doesn't love any other kids. It just means that he has a unique love for his son. And we would all expect that. And so in the same way, what God's doing is he's expressing here a unique love for his people. A love that results in his commitment to always act for their good, to always bring about good in their lives. The next thing, so we've seen that God's love is everlasting and with action. We've seen that it's fatherly. And so in that sense, it's not this non-specific, vague, spiritual concept. The last thing we see about God's love is that it's passionate. Look at the last verse we read. Listen to the way God describes Ephraim. And just to note, Ephraim is at this point in Israel's history, a shorthand for Israel. It's just another word that God uses to refer to Israel. He says, is Ephraim my dear son? Is he my darling child? For as often as I speak against him, I do remember him still. Therefore my heart yearns for him. I will surely have mercy on him. See, another thing that we can do with God's love to make it kind of subhuman is we make it passionless. We make it this stoic kind of duty of God that, oh, he's God, so he has to love us. That's what God does, right? Like, he has to feel that way about us. I hear people often say things like, I'm sure God loves me, I'm just not sure he likes me very much. And the implication there is, okay, God, I guess you love me, but come on, we all know you have to. And when it comes down to it, I'm kind of a mess up, so I'm sure you're at least not excited about it, Is that the picture of God you get in verse 20? He doesn't say, Ephraim, that kid of mine, there you go, screwing up again. Guess I'm going to have to take him back one more time. He says, is Ephraim my dear son? Is he my darling child? Therefore my heart yearns for him. The word for heart there is actually vows. Now God doesn't have vows, but what he's saying is he feels a pain for his child when they're wayward. And that he loves them, that he yearns for his people in a passionate way. God is excited to love his people, and he hurts whenever they stray from him. So it's not this subhuman, I do my duty thing. I once heard Pastor John Piper give an illustration of if he bought flowers for his wife, and his wife said, these are great, thank you so much. He said, no problem, I'm just doing my duty. Would she feel very loved by that? Do we think that's love? Do we look at human love and put that standard on it? No, we expect if you love someone, there's going to be passion towards them. And so God's love is infinitely greater than human love, not lesser. And so God loves us passionately. He loves his people passionately. Everlasting, fatherly, and passionate. That's the description we get of God's love in this passage. And I'm convinced that when people say, well, yeah, of course God is a God of love, that's not what we're talking about. And I'm convinced even for those of us who maybe know those concepts, we don't necessarily live within that reality. We don't feel that way. So even as I say these things, I'm guessing I'm getting one of two responses. I call it the yeah, but, or the so what. Some of you are saying, yeah, but come on, I mean, God's a little disappointed with me. I mean, I don't do as well as I should. But some of you are saying, so what? Like, I'm pretty good. Like, why wouldn't God love me? Like, well, what's the big deal? Like, everybody knows God's a God of love. There tends to be two reasons for these responses. One would be, and that we even see in this passage of Israel, as to why they might be tempted to disbelieve this. One would be our circumstances. The other would be our unevaluation of our worthiness. So circumstances. Israel was in bad circumstances. There's no denying it. Okay? They're under a foreign power, and they're not in the land that they were promised. And so things are not going well. Their fate is not looking good from their perspective. So you can see how it would be hard for them to believe that God still loves them and is working for their good. Many of us have experienced similar things in our lives. Some of us to varying degrees. So for me, like some of the most hurtful experiences I can think of were when I got made fun of in middle school. And that's legitimate. That really hurt. And today I still feel some of the effects of that and act out of that. But I know for many of you it was far worse. It was physical abuse. It was sexual abuse. There are stories of real suffering all around us. There are circumstances we've faced in life that have really hurt. We live in a fallen world and we've felt the effects of it. And so in the middle of that, it's tempting to think, how can God love me? How can God love me and all that stuff happen? This is especially true for those of you who had bad relationships with your parents or your father. God calls himself a father in this passage. Now let's be straight. Being a dad is hard. I haven't even been one, but just observing dads, and it looks very difficult, okay? And every dad, by virtue of being human, is a sinner. So we can let our dads off the hook a little bit and say, like, okay, I get it. Like, it's not easy. The goal here is not to get mad at dad. The point is, if when you hear God describe himself as father, you think of something other than what he's really describing himself as, that's going to mess things up. Other parts of the Bible, God describes himself as living water. If you think of loving water when you hear that, it's not going to be very exciting. And so we just want to have an accurate picture of what God means when he calls himself Father. But none of your fathers lived up to what we just described. That passionate, committed, love, sacrificial love. Some of your dads may have been absent. They may have been physically left your family. They may have been irresponsible, couldn't hold a job, couldn't keep food on the table. You may have felt like they weren't for your good, that they were more about their good. So when you performed for them, you got their love, and when you didn't, you got their rejection. Some of your fathers were very responsible, actually, and they followed through on all their duties. But the passion piece was kind of missing. Mark Driscoll calls those guys sturdy oak Owen. It's the guy who he goes to work every day, he puts food on the table, he takes his kids to church, he shows up to the sporting events, but he was never there. He was never present emotionally. He didn't tell you he loved you, he didn't hug you, he didn't kiss you, he didn't embrace you, he didn't show that kind of passion to you. Because, well, I don't know, that's unmanly or something. And so hearing that this is the kind of father you have in heaven is just hard to believe, because it's so counter to your experience. On the flip side, some of you may actually idolize your dad. You may actually think, my dad did all that stuff great. And so instead of saying, yeah, but my circumstances, or yeah, but my dad was like this, you say, so what? I already have a dad like that. My dad was great. And so pleasing your father and your family has actually become an idol for you. And the love of God's just not that big of a deal because you think you kind of already got it. Secondly, another reason we can think of God's love as kind of so what is our evaluation of how worthy of it we are. In America, we live in a self-esteem culture. I think this is a big part of why, and this is a unique thing in America, that everybody thinks God is a God of love. Like, if you went to the Middle East, that would not be the predominant opinion. It's very culturally relative that everybody thinks that. But I think it's because we live in a society that tells you that your problem is that you're not positive enough. You need to start thinking more positively. You need to have a higher view of yourself. So if you're not convinced God loves you, the problem is low self-esteem, and you don't think positively. And so if you feel any negative feelings, they're not true, you're awesome, you're great, you're perfect. And we can even dress this up in religious language, God made you that way, so you're awesome. And you are just the way you are supposed to be. Don't let anyone tell you different. I have one of those cars that's too old to have an auxiliary jack, but too new to have a tape deck, so I can't plug in my iPod. So I'm listening to a lot of radio. And last year, this Pink song was on all the time. I think it was Pink. Pretty please, don't you ever feel like you're less than perfect? Right? And so, don't you ever feel like you're less than perfect? Like, what if we are, Like, can we be real on that? Can we be real that we are not perfect? The problem with all that power of positive thinking and let's boost your self-esteem is that a lot of times it's just not true. It's not rooted in anything factual. It's kind of like, well, it works and you'll feel better, so believe it. But it's a lie. Deep down inside, I think we all know this. I think we all know I'm not awesome. There's something wrong. If you accept the Bible's definition of sin, you've really got no choice on that one, because it's pretty clear that you fall way short of God's holiness. But even if you don't we even fall short of our own moral standards? For instance, one I hear from most people, even if they're not Christians, you should try to be a nice person.